We're doing a little interview with Heidi and Maria. I'm going to introduce them in a second. The topic is talking about recovery resources and recovery capital for victims coming out of sex trafficking. This is a part of an Annex series that we're doing to try to bring more awareness. The term recovery capital is actually a chemical dependency term that we like recovery resources a little bit as well, but the whole idea is what happens after treatment and recovery. Treatment recovery is a season where an individual is able to be in a treatment center type of setting where things are very controlled, time to detox, able to both physically and mentally have a better perspective. A Christian program hopefully speaks of worth and value and God's love and forgiveness. But then after that season, then the idea is individuals return to a place where they receive lots of recovery capital, basically a community of support, encouragement, as well as opportunities that they can continue a healthy life and a life of recovery. The realities with many sex trafficking victims, the place they return to a lot of times ends up the same culture, sometimes the same neighborhood, and even the same home that got them there in the first place. One of our hearts with the Annex is that this is an area that the local church can be a big part of, and we believe is a huge gap that's missing and the main reason why individuals return. So with that introduction, Heidi and Maria, I've asked you just to give us a real brief introduction of your own stories and involvement.
Sure. Well, I'm Heidi, and I'm a Minnesota native and also a survivor of over 10 years in the sex industry. And the reason that I'm so enthusiastic about what's happening here is because it was so difficult for me to get out. There was no place to go. You escape, basically, especially if you have a pimp. And then where? And so for me, it took a long time to get the healing and the services that I needed. Mm-hmm. And you just try to make do and try to figure it out as you go along.
Gotcha. Maria, give us a little introduction of your background as well.
Okay, my name's Maria, and I'm from the Netherlands. I've lived here in Minnesota almost 4 years, and before that I lived in Asia, where I was involved with a ministry, Eden Ministry, that worked with girls who were trapped into prostitution, and we started several transitional homes there. And since I'm back here in Minnesota, it's still my heart to be involved in that kind of ministry, and I've been very excited to be involved with the Annex, to be hands-on again.
Excellent, excellent. Maria is our initial director with the Annex. Heidi, I'm going to start with you just to get into a little more detail. So, you hear about the term, modern day slavery,
Right.
Sex trafficking, domestic prostitution. So, a lot of people ask, well, are women actually chained up in basements where they, like the story in Ohio that came out a couple years ago? Is that what it happens? Or, the reality is a majority of women are not chained up in basement.
Right.
But the reality is it's still extremely hard for an individual to get out and to be able to stay out. So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. I think women are more chained up psychologically and spiritually more than physically.
Yeah.
I think that the very nature of prostitution, the sex industry, there are a lot of different names for it, but it all boils down to people being sold for sex. And some people have pimps, some people don't. But the shame that is such a part of the industry keeps a person trapped in there because you feel like you can't do better, you feel like you're not worthy. And if you have a pimp or an abuser that is telling you the same type of thing, you just really feel stuck. And so I think that's the greatest thing to overcome. Plus all the nature of prostitution is multiple beatings and rapes. And when you're treated like a commodity, it takes a toll on you mentally. Yeah. And so it takes a long time to break out of that.
Right. Have you... I've heard people liken women that like have a pimp or an individual over them, similar to like as we think of a domestic abuse marriage.
Yes.
You know, and can you make a few similarities to that? Because a lot of times we think, this woman that's being abused in her marriage, why doesn't she just leave her husband?
Right, right. And it's all interchangeable. I mean, the two go hand in hand. In my case, my pimp was my husband and is the father of my children. And that's the case in a lot of the relationships. Or they consider them a boyfriend, or they love him. I mean, there's a lot of psychological connection. There's love, there's dependence, there's emotional dependence, there's fear, but there's also the good feelings as well. And so, you know, people who are into pimping are master manipulators, and they really draw a person in and hold them emotionally, along with the shame that they put on them as well.
Yeah. How many women do you think want to get out?
I'd say the majority of women want to get out. I think when I was in, I had this great script that I would tell people about how I choose it, I like it, I'm making money, it's none of your business, get your hands off my body and off my life, that type of thing. But we say that so that we can keep doing it. We're fooling ourselves. All of us deep down in the quiet of the night, or when we've been beaten or we've been raped or whatever, we so desperately want something different. But we don't know how, we don't know where to go, we don't feel like we deserve any better.
How you know, with your own story and being able to get out, you had to basically try multiple times.
Yes.
Because you couldn't find resources.
Right.
And you couldn't find, even within the church, sometimes was even a larger shaming aspect.
Right.
And created more walls to try to get out.
Right.
Why can't women find recovery resources? Why can't they find communities that will encourage them to get out?
It's so hard because you have some programs that are specifically for women coming out of prostitution. They're very, very few. They're focused on that issue, and so when women come in, they know that that's a place where they understand the issue. And myself, I went through the domestic abuse route, the shelters and restraining orders, but it was too shameful for me to tell them that the real issue here was prostitution. And so you're in the midst of this programming, wherever it is, whether it's domestic abuse, whether it's a faith-based, and they aren't equipped to deal with a prostitution issue. They're not, or you might be coming in with a chemical dependency or domestic abuse issue, and you don't feel comfortable talking about it. And in the church, it's the same thing. You know, there's so much stigma around that. There's so much stigma about supposed sexual sin, and this really isn't as much a sexual issue as it is, you know, just an abuse issue.
And that's Maria. Maria, you were with a mission organization for 20 years in Asia, and then a big part of what you did is also work with trafficking victims. Was a part of starting the Eden Ministry Transitional Home in 2003. Tell us a little bit about, as you worked with women directly in recovery and getting out, and how even some of those issues are, you know, similar to kind of what we can think of in Asia to right here in Minnesota for individuals going in the Midwest.
Okay. Well, one of the things that what we did in Asia was visiting the women in the brothels, and what I saw there was, in a way, they have a sense of community there. Not a healthy one, but there's a sense of community there where they go through things together and understand their own little world, which is abusive and all that, but there's that sense of belonging. And I think we all want that sense of belonging. And I think that's what's so important with the transitional home here in Minnesota as well, is that sense of belonging, being walking through our difficult times together, having somebody there to walk with you through the day-to-day issues in the recovery, in the long-term recovery. That's what I saw there firsthand, and I believe that's the same here.
And I remember you talking before about even a certain madam that had this kind of weird, you know, she was the one to make sure the girls were working,
Yeah.
and at the same
And I
time,
would see her cooking in the
she's-
brothel.
she's cooking and
food for them.
being like a mama to them.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
And it was, of course, to protect her investment as well.
Right.
But yeah, very much, meeting those basic needs in a way
Right.
of feeding and taking care, making sure they would see the doctor and stuff like that. Yeah.
So cases where women have come out, been through like a very solid recovery home program of treatment of some kind, and then ended up returning back to the brothel on their complete own free will. They weren't coerced back. They weren't, captured and brought back.
Yeah.
So why does that happen?
I think many factors play in, but very much the sense of belonging again. And two, if, like what Heidi mentioned before, they're not bondage, they're not held captive, but in their emotion they are. So if we need to address that, the inner person too, with the healing and recovery, and see inner healing happening. So because to go back to that message where in a way, I'm stuck here.
Yeah. So again, as we think of recovery resources, we see that there's such a gap because one of our seminars, an officer said, we can't arrest our way out of this problem.
Right.
And what he was referring to, we
Yeah.
have one place to put people, and that's criminals in jail. Police officers don't have rehabilitation for victims. So he was basically speaking into the fact that we rely on the community to provide resources for victims. And then we had an outreach worker say, we can't institutional our way out of this problem.
Right.
Meaning it's like, okay, we have individuals that have drug problems that are victims. Let's create treatment centers with a specialty, which I believe is important, and that we have that. But it's still,
That's that long term.
we have the dilemma of what happens after treatment. And the idea of the recovery resources is, can there be a place where women come to where they can have a community around them of encouragement and support, along with having opportunities with some basic life skills if that's needed.
Yeah.
Right.
So my final question in this segment is, how can the church, what does the church have to do to be recovery resources or recovery capital to these women?
I think what's important is that it's not us and them. I think we all have commonalities, we all have weaknesses, we all have strengths, and so we come together on that basis about, you're going to learn as much from me as I'm going to learn from you. I think in the past we've separated that out, and we don't want to come with the mindset, I'm going to help you poor women out. No, actually women in prostitution are some of the strongest women you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
And so it's first developing that mindset about, we're all in this together, we're all children of God. And being open to just whatever's going to come your way. We could be friends. It's important for us not to just be in these communities that are all prostitution or no, we're full women who can thrive in any community. And so to create that hand in hand with the churches, a lot of us are believers. A lot of us grew up in the church. I know I did. And so for me, church was always the sanctuary, and yet church isn't always a sanctuary.
Yeah.
And so we have to create a safe place, and then create a place where we come together as women and men, and we're joined together.
Yeah. Maria, can you speak at all into church culture? What are the walls or the stigma that are part of church culture? Why women wouldn't just be hurting? Why aren't we hurting women flocking to churches that is supposed to be a refuge?
I think for one, to enter a church is a scary thing anyway, because you walk in a building and you think everybody knows each other, and you feel like you're, as a newcomer, stick out. So that's always a scary thing. And especially when you have this kind of past, it's even more scary. And people ask me many times, what can I do to help? What can I do? And I think so much of the answer is just to sit and listen.
Yeah.
We don't have to give answers. It's just being with people and hearing them tell their story, and just being available for people. I think that's a big thing in today's culture, especially in America, just to be available for people and not, just to be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Let me just wrap this segment up a big piece of the vision of the Annex Network is to have a network of congregations that have a vision to be able to provide recovery resources and have a culture of recovery capital for women that are coming out. A big piece of the model is a transitional home that really has a nuclei of a larger congregation, meaning a ministry team that of women that are actually living in the same facility in a different apartment, but also women that are probably more your 30 to 70-year-old mamas that aren't going to live there but can come be involved weekly. And the women are led in a life skill program with a caseworker who is skilled at social work and can access the resources and do what caseworkers do well, that often the church doesn't do well. But then this ministry team of role models and residential volunteers and volunteers, this nuclei, share meals with the women every week, give rides to go to school or to job training, are available to do devotions and just small things like that. So now the women, when they enter the church building, if you will, they've already starting to build a relationship with a small group, that's the church, meaning the body of Christ. And so now they're not just showing up part of their program, but they're going with Sue and Phyllis and Joan, who they've gotten to know, and they live across the hall, which is ideal, for that 6-month to 18-month season, that they can build relationships, and then there can be like go-to people as far as they process things, and also that they're seeing role models of spiritual formation, embracing the faith.
Yes.
But then as they get used to the church culture, the sight smells of it, that partnership helps change the church culture, and the church becomes more aware of how can we be a place of welcoming. But now these individuals, once they leave there, they'll have experienced healthy recovery resources from a community that they'll feel welcome to come back. And even if they move to Albuquerque, another city, that they're familiar with church culture and they can find a similar church and not come in and feel like they stick out and kind of understand how it works and whatnot. So, well, thank you once again. We're excited about the Annex in the future, and take a look at the other video. Thanks, Heidi.